It's definitely hard. It's like around the clock job, but that's for sure. Like if you're not feeding, you're pumping. I mean, you have to wear pads 24/7. You're raw. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it.
My nipples, TMI, oh my goodness, like no one prepared you for that.
When I was breastfeeding, if I had been drinking, I would still pump, you gotta pump anyway, and I would keep that and I would mark a big X on it, and I would use it for stuff in the bath or like on scrapes, my kids' scrapes, stuff like that.
You know, even my mom had told me she wasn't able to breastfeed because her milk wasn't coming in. I wasn't latching.
Leave the house without your boobs leaking, and yes, it's a whole new world.
It was kind of hard in the beginning before my milk came in because I just could not tell what he was getting. I know he only needed like a small amount, but even now, like sometimes I get so worried he's not like fully satisfied, and because I can't see how much is going into him, and it like freaks me out a little bit. Like I know, like I love the bonding experience and stuff, but sometimes like pumping and putting it into a bottle where I can physically see how much he's getting, like I feel like he gets more satisfied like that sometimes.
So I am breastfeeding, and I'm super grateful because I have heard, and I was actually very prepared because a lot of people I'm close to had a very hard time breastfeeding. I'm very grateful to say that that's actually been a pretty smooth process. I will say though, like the pain that comes from breastfeeding, like breastfeeding was natural. She latched great. We had no issues there, but my nipples, TMI, oh my goodness, like no one prepared you for that. And they're like, get the cream, you'll be fine. The ointments, no, didn't help. I just had to tough it out. And finally, like after about a month, I finally can like breastfeed without being like, I'm in so much pain.
It has been amazing. And I kind of prepared myself for it to not be easy just because, you know, even my mom had told me she wasn't able to breastfeed because her milk wasn't coming in. I wasn't latching. So I knew right off the bat that breastfeeding was not something that you just get to do. It's this whole thing is like a hit or miss. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, which is why I find it so weird that people ask, like, are you going to breastfeed? It's like, well, number one, I may not want to because it can be very isolating. And number two, like, well, I hope I can.
With Brooks, he had a really hard time with breastfeeding. It was very, very difficult, and I ended up switching him to formula at 5 months, and I got my cycle right back, and that's when I got pregnant. So, and so I love the breastfeeding process and journey. So I really wanted to breastfeed Reed, so we've been doing that. And I had to get his lip and tongue tie cut in order for us to have kind of a better relationship. And it's now just going smoothly at 4.5 months.
Do breastfeeding classes before you go to the hospital because I didn't do anything about breastfeeding. And I remember after like I pushed him out and then 15 minutes later, they're like, here, and they put him on my breast. And I'm like, what do I do? What's going on? I mean, within a day I had like blisters on my boobs because I didn't know anything. And then like, they're like the latch, this, and I told Bria, I go, breastfeeding is a job. I was so emotional about it the first 2 months. It is.
Well, I told her to meet with my breastfeeding doula, but she decided to skip that Zoom meeting.
So that's a meeting I should have had, but I agree, breastfeeding is so tough. But now being 3 months, it's so easy. He knows what to do. And it's now a beautiful thing. Like I love it. He loves it. But that first 2 months, oh my gosh, it rocks you.
It does.
It really does.
Yeah.
For me, what was so different is Birdie was very much typical 3 to 4 hours. She was an amazing eater. It was actually really nice. Buddy, when he first came home, it was like every 2 hours. And then sometimes I felt like he wanted to eat in an hour and a half later. And I'm like, wait, what? And I couldn't with him, like just get a schedule going because it was all over the place. And even with his latching, it was just like, it wasn't as good as Birdie's. And so it made me feel like a new mom because I was like, wait a second, it was so easy with Bird. This is really hard.
Yeah.
I put so much immense pressure on myself to breastfeed for at least a year, and I wasn't able to do that. So I just stressed myself out more than I feel like I needed to be. And I think this time going into it, I'm just setting my expectations a lot lower and realizing that whatever I can do is okay. Like that's enough, and I don't need to do any more than that.
It was tough because, especially that I had this oversupply of milk. I mean, breastfeeding came so easy for me, and it was never an issue of like not having enough and but it was making me depressed, and I started thinking to myself, Palmer having a happy, mentally sane mother is ultimately more important than her getting breast milk. I never even drink breast milk, and I'm totally fine. And I think nowadays the formula, and I know people will argue with me on this too, but I think nowadays the formula is probably almost just as good. So
I couldn't actually breastfeed, which it was hard because I found that out after the fact. So after I had Slayton Cruz, I had breast augmentation. I had, I got my boobs done, and I didn't ever think I was going to have more kids. I didn't get pregnant naturally with them. And, Dove was a happy surprise. So when I was in the hospital, I was trying to breastfeed her, and it just wasn't working. Yeah. And they had said because of the surgery, there's a chance that you can't afterwards. And I wasn't aware, and I was super emotional about it, like cried about it for days. And then I just realized, like, okay, I have to just let this go. The important part is that she's fed. Right. And, I know that, yes, I was able to breastfeed the other kids, but that doesn't mean that I love Dove any differently, or that I'm not supporting her in the same way. And I really had to let go of that, like, mom guilt that comes along with something like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got an elective surgery and now this has happened. But, I let it go, and now I can kind of laugh at it and go.
We do bottles sometimes so I can have a little bit of a break. So I'm going to shout out Tommy Tippy with this, but they have like their Close to Nature bottles, which are, I think that's what it's called, Close to Nature, and they fill like the most breast-like bottles. So finding stuff like that has made it really easier too for us to make the transition, because at first he was fighting bottles, and now it's like stuff like that sometimes just makes the breastfeeding process easier, because I'm like, okay, it doesn't feel so overwhelming. I don't feel so touched out if I can just have somebody take a bottle for, one feeding.